Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. Your host with the moisture is me, Dusty O'Connell. I am joined by our customary co-host, analyst, columnist for ColdOmaha.com and 1500ESPN.com in Minneapolis, among other places. He's also a generally useful human named Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Good, Dusty. How are you?
Hanging in there. I'm, thanks to a very unfortunate large glass of water incident, I am cell phoneless until I can get an insurance replacement, which luckily is such a Byzantine process. It's given me time to reflect on how much simpler life was before I had like a disgusting smartphone addiction.
I don't need to hear the screed against modern technology, Dusty.
It isn't really that. It's more just like how little self-control
I don't know why you would do that to the listeners who are listening through their podcasting app.
Exactly. So yeah, just do whatever if you have a cell phone, just keep it away from water. I'm very good at not cracking screens, but the only two phones I've ever killed have been the result of water damage. So that's my life. Joining us this week is a fella who was on the show not terribly long ago, but given our opponents this week, we thought it would be wise to bring back the Ben Natan. How you doing, Ben?
I am doing really well. How are you doing?
Phoneless and also
of course.
So you are primarily associated with Bleeding Green Nation. Do you have anything else that you would care to plug before we dive into the show?
No, I'm primarily doing draft analyst stuff for Bleeding Green Nation, and also the wonderful folks over there give me some op-ed opportunities, and I just wrote a piece on domestic violence in the NFL and also in just general society, which came out today. So if people want to pop on over to my page and take a look at that there.
Ben Natan, shying away from controversy. Sick into sports.
That's my brand.
Normally does. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, before we dissect all the ways that the Vikings are going to roll the Eagles on Sunday, I did want to take a couple minutes and say thank you to a few people who have been kind enough to contribute their hard-earned money to Norse Code. Sydney McSweeney sends us a generous $50 donation via the PayPal. Thank you very much, Sydney. We really appreciate when people step up and give, chunks of money like that. It really goes a long. I mean, that pays for over a month of sending every episode of Norse Code to every person that wants to hear it. And that, to me, is pretty great, especially in the middle of a season where we are breaking our own download records basically week after week.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We also appreciate it when people contribute via Patreon, become recurring sponsors in the mold of public radio. Jason Jury contributes at the $3.50 level, makes a commitment to support us all year round and keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay by giving us that $3.50. You can actually, before anything else, because we keep forgetting to do this, poor Tyler Trott threw us $5 via the PayPal a few weeks ago with the note, "I want to be a member of the exclusive crew surrounding you and Arif. I figured money would help me reach my goal. Great show, keep it up." Is this what we meant by selling out? Is our friendship, is our inner circle for sale?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, cool. So good job, Tyler.
I will be friends with you for money.
Exactly.
It's like a frat.
Exactly. If you would like to join the Norse Code fraternity, you may do so either at paypal.me/NorseCode or patreon.com/NorseCode. You can either give a one-time contribution or become a recurring sponsor of the show, and we will use your precious dollars to continue bringing the best digital multimedia content that is Vikings related on the whole internet. Now then, the Eagles are, I guess, coming back to earth, it seems like, after the first few weeks. And there was an article on the Daily Norseman, the 5 Good Questions, where another writer for Bleeding Green Nation posits that now that teams are starting to get film on Wentz and kind of the new offense, there have been some major coaching changes since last year, the Eagles. Now that there's some film available on how they roll, other teams are going to have a little easier time picking them apart, coming into Week 7, playing the number 1 defense in the NFL.
Yeah, so what is the deal with why there seems to be a slowdown with the Eagles?
I think what you saw against Detroit was with Wentz, the big thing for him in the offense is the team did a really good job insulating him within the design of the offense. Kind of have screen passes, these short pop passes, keep the running game strong, force teams to really come up and try to stop those short passes. And once they're coming up and really focusing on that short game, that short to intermediate game, then they take shots down the field. And Wentz was doing a really excellent job kind of working within that system. And because of the success of the system and the strong play of the defense, the team was always playing up, never really had to go away from the game plan. And it was just easier for Wentz to kind of stay comfortable. And then against Detroit, the team got down early and then had to function outside of really the structure of the offense, the structure of the game plan, put more pressure on Wentz. And with the rookie quarterback, when you have that type of pressure, they're more prone to mistakes. Unfortunately, the supporting cast hasn't been doing a lot to help them. And then against Washington, you lose Lane Johnson, who's probably the best right tackle in the NFL, if not one of the best right tackles in the NFL. And losing him was disastrous, replacing him with a day 3 rookie against Ryan Kerrigan, who's one of the better pass rushers in the NFL. And it was really rough. And frankly, it was a little encouraging because you saw Wentz do well. He was playing well and had his moments outside of the system, which as a fan makes you more comfortable about, where he's headed in the future. But the reality is, you're not asking a guy who's 6 games into his career to carry an entire team. And unfortunately, with the surrounding talent and the inability to, stay competitive early in the game and constantly having to play from behind the last 2 weeks, it's been a lot for him. And the team hasn't been able to really recover. It's worth noting that in both games there was an opportunity for either a game-winning drive or a game-tying drive, but neither times did the team come through on it.
So I think this brings up maybe a deeper evaluation of Wentz. So this podcast represents a meeting of the minds where the two of us were wrong simultaneously on both Bradford and Wentz.
Hell yeah.
And this gives us like sort of an opportunity to sort of rehash kind of what we've learned about these players, what we've learned about Carson Wentz in particular, because there's a lot more to learn about this guy. So what combination of strengths and weaknesses came into play sort of early on for Wentz that allowed him to have the success that he had, and how did those sort of weaknesses come to the fore in the last 2 weeks that really allowed teams to take advantage of the Eagles? Because it's not like the Detroit Lions and the Washington Redskins. It's not like they're world beaters. And before those games, the Eagles were sitting atop the NFC power rankings and stuff like that. So, what combination of strengths and weaknesses enabled and then sort of neutered the Eagles' offense?
I think in terms of for Wentz, the strengths come up as he's very diligent, and because of his diligence, I think he does a great job of just working the system. He doesn't try to work outside of the system when it's not asking him to, which I think is like overrated and underrated at the same time, where you have guys like Alex Smith who just kind of like dink and dunk the whole time and everything like that. But with Wentz, he's running the system very efficiently, or he's doing exactly what the team asked him to do. And when everything is working around him, the offense is able to run. But the flip side of that is that he can get a little bit too robotic sometimes. So when those options are taken away, or he has to kind of work outside of those options, you're not going to see the immediate or consistent success you would see from any other top tier quarterback. And I think that's also just has to do with his lack of experience in the NFL. And then other weaknesses that he has is he can get a little bit inaccurate under pressure, and he has a tendency to hold on to the ball for too long. But I think the big strength, and it's kind of another kind of thing where it's like you hear about it during the draft process and you just kind of like you put your hands in you put your head in your hands and say like, oh God, it's just like this stuff again, where they talk about toughness and grit, and it's such an overplayed cliche. But I think there's something to really be said about a guy who can constantly get hit and then kind of come back from it, or guys who can constantly kind of hang in there and take shots down the field like he's able to, and that really gives the team a vertical element they really haven't had the last 2 years, and it makes the offense a little bit more potent.
Yeah, there was actually, I may be able to link it in the show notes. I remember reading a Pro Football Focus study on how quarterback performance declines with the increased number of hits and stuff like that, and how there are some quarterbacks who have the ability to sort of avoid that decline. I think Ben Roethlisberger is kind of the name that comes to mind, and the name that actually sort of powered through the study. He declined a lot less than most quarterbacks, as successive hits kept on coming. And having a quarterback who has the ability to do that is evidently, a demonstrable skill, and it's something that separates quarterbacks consistently from year to year, and it's something that, if Carson Wentz has, certainly would make him a huge asset. I guess my next question is, the way that you're describing this Eagles offense, it's describing a lot of how the Giants tried to adapt to their weaknesses and strengths, against the Vikings. So the Giants have a very weak offensive line, but it's an offensive line that hasn't given up very much pressure because of the way that they've decided to design their offense this year. There's a lot of short passes with occasional deep throws, usually coming off of play action in order to confuse the pass rush. And those short passes are extremely quick. Eric Flowers would get beat pretty consistently by Everson Griffin throughout the second half of the game, and Griffin couldn't get to Eli Manning except on one or two plays for quarterback hits, just because of how quickly they got rid of the ball. But the Giants did not have a good offense in that game, and so in a way, the pressure that the Vikings provided really enabled them to sort of clean up those short passes. They're one of the best teams in the league, in my opinion. I don't really have stats to back this up, but they're one of the best teams in the league, in my opinion, in dealing with those short passes, those underneath throws, and preventing them from gaining additional yardage, the ability to close down on them and stuff like that. So the way that you're describing the way the Eagles' offense is set up, it very much seems like it's kind of in the Vikings' wheelhouse in terms of the way that they want to deal with things. Is that a concern? Am I missing a nuance here? What is your reaction to the idea that the Vikings have been scheming teams into short passes and then beating them there?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Arif. I am terrified of what the Vikings defense is going to do to Carson Wentz for a lot of reasons. Because, one, they have the perfect kind of personnel to really deal with that short game where the Eagles are really depending on the yards after catch ability of their running backs and their wide receivers. Because you have a guy like Harrison Smith, you have an Eric Kendricks, you have an Anthony Barr, guys who can really fly around, sideline to sideline and deal with those players. But the other thing is, not only do you have Everson Griffin, Everson Griffin is a problem. I mean, he's a serious problem. But Linval Joseph is, he's a monster. And when you have him against Jason Kelce, who's been playing so poorly not just the past couple of weeks, but the past couple of weeks going into last season, Kelce's been a major liability on this team. And when you have Linval Joseph lined up over Jason Kelce, you're basically wrecking the interior running game. And it's going to be a massive problem trying to produce that short yardage game, because if you don't have a run game, the good way to compensate for a lack of run game is those short passes, just to kind of get those 3 or 4 yards one play at a time. But when you have guys who are so good at limiting that short yardage offense, it forces you to go deep, and you can't go deep against the Vikings defense because you can't have those deep dropbacks, because then Everson Griffin working on Big V, who's the Eagles, 5th round rookie out of TCU, who just got abused last week. It's like you're not really. It's hard to find a point of weakness on this Vikings defense for the Eagles to attack, and you're really going to have to be banking on boom or bust plays to try to beat this team on defense.
Yeah, I tried to pronounce this dude's name last week.
I'm not even gonna try it. It's like I don't want to offend the guy, so it's.
Well, see, I get to do it because literally everyone mispronounces my name at one point. So let's see, Halapuluvati. I probably got the emphasis wrong, but I'm pretty sure I got all the syllables. Halapuluvati Vitae. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
I can call him Mr. Vitae. I think I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, he went into a bunch of draft books as Hal Vitae. I remember having to input his name for the aggregator consensus draft boards and stuff like that. So he was a problem. Speaking of which, the Vikings have, obviously, like you mentioned, Linval Joseph has the ability to shut down an interior run game kind of by himself. Everson Griffin's been doing a lot of damage. Of course, Daniil Hunter, as a sub-rotational pass rusher, has been able to get to the quarterback perhaps a little bit more consistently than anyone else. This is the nature of situational pass rushers. And then, of course, there's Tom Johnson, who I feel, I just wrote a piece, I just published it, on why Tom Johnson's one of the most underrated defensive tackles in the NFL. And I was wondering, you've got this defensive front. It's one of the deeper defensive fronts in the NFL. You're up against, an offensive line that's been weak and that's relatively weak. But the flip side of the ball is that the Eagles might win the trench warfare battle. I mean, you got Brandon Graham, who I think it's kind of on the same track as Everson Griffin, who received a deal where people were kind of surprised at the amount of money he received. In fact, I thought he received a little bit too little. And he was underrated because, he was a sub-rotational guy that ended up getting a lot of efficiency but didn't get his name out there. And then you've got, Fletcher Cox, who's probably one of the best, under tackles in the league. I think you're missing Benny Logan, which is probably a problem. And then Carson Barwin on the other side of Brandon Graham is not, that bad. And you're up against one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Do you think that, that recipe of being able to go up against an even weaker offensive line with a defensive line that's being coordinated by one of the best defensive coordinators in the league for defensive lines, do you think that gives the Eagles an edge in terms of that sort of mythical battle in the trenches?
Yeah, and I think if the Eagles are going to win this game, it has to be the Eagles need to win ugly. They need to really kind of create problems for Sam Bradford. And the thing with Benny Logan is huge because he's such a big part of the run defense. And playing next to Fletcher Cox, it's kind of hard to get the recognition that you deserve. And Fletcher Cox is one of the best three techniques in the league, if not the best, besides maybe Aaron Donald. But Benny Logan is a very, very good player in his own right and easily the best run defender on the team. And you saw against Washington when he went out, I mean, he immediately made a difference in terms of Washington's ability to run on the Eagles, especially running up the middle. Besides that, Brandon Graham has been outstanding this season. He's one of the, better all-around defensive ends in the league, I think, in terms of run defense and pass rush. And Connor Barwin's been an issue. I mean, he has his plays, and then he just can get completely wiped out from time to time. But Vinny Curry's also been a big part of the defensive line rotation. They play him out on defensive end. They'll play him at defensive tackle and sub packages. They really do like to move him around a lot. I think he does a lot better working inside than he does on the outside, which is something I think they're going to do a lot against the Vikings, is kind of use him as that wide nine defensive tackle. And I think that the Eagles have a good chance to really create pressure after a week that they weren't really able to against Washington's offensive line. Washington did a really good job neutralizing the Eagles' pass rush, both with just short passing game and just the dominance of Brendan Scherf did an excellent job on Fletcher Cox, and Trent Williams was outstanding the entire game. But obviously, it's a big downgrade going to the Vikings from Washington in terms of the type of guys you're going up against. So I do think the Eagles are going to really be able to create problems for the Vikings in the passing game. But my worry is that the Vikings might not even need to really lean on their passing game at all, because they should be able to run on the Eagles pretty easily with Benny Logan out.
So you mentioned that, without Benny Logan in there, that, the Vikings may be able to get some more success in the running game. It is a little bit weird to talk about the Vikings running game. It seems to have petered off from previous years. But, without Adrian Peterson, it seems like it may have improved, but that may not mean much because it's still not sort of there yet. The flip side of the ball, it doesn't seem like the Eagles have a consistent sort of go-to understanding the way that the running game is working, and just generally speaking, what kind of confidence do you have that the Vikings running game can set up favorable third down situations for Sam Bradford? What confidence do you have in a vacuum, not necessarily against the Vikings, that the Eagles running game can do the same for Carson Wentz?
Well, the Eagles' philosophy on offense, and I think you saw it best exemplified against the Steelers, is once you have the passing game established and you have that deep ball kind of a threat to the to the defense, they kind of back off a little bit, and then you start running the ball, a lot more in the third and fourth quarter, and then that's how they're really winning games early in the season. We're kind of finishing off the game with running instead of trying to start with running, and then you using that to set up the play action. And they had success, and early on in the season, I was kind of confident. I was like, okay, well, Ryan Matthews is doing a little bit, Wendell Smallwood and Darren Sproles and Kenyon Barner. I mean, these are all like speedy, quick guys, while Matthews is more this powerful guy, and they all looked good and complemented each other really well. And then it all just kind of fell off, and I think in part it fell off because of the lack of consistency from the passing game. So because there's this very obvious symbiotic relationship between the two of them, and the Eagles are really depending on a vertical element to their offense, like a consistent vertical element to their offense to set up the running game. I'm not really confident because, Ryan Matthews hasn't been dependable this season like, a lot of people have been wanting him to. Not just his health, but his play has been kind of mediocre as well. And the Eagles' younger guys aren't really doing much. So they're really depending on Darren Sproles, who's, 33 years old and kind of past his prime and can't really shoulder the load of a rushing offense. So I don't have a ton of confidence going forward. And obviously, a guy like Smallwood can maybe emerge down the line. As for the Vikings, I think that McKinnon has shown enough that he can eventually grow into that guy, and I think it takes time for younger running backs to get to a level where they can be that type of player for an offense. I think you saw that a lot with a guy like Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon was so excellent in college because he was consistently kind of depending on his athleticism to just beat the guy across from him. And when he got into the league, he was thinking way too much, and I think he was really overcomplicating things for himself his rookie year. And then you saw this year he's a little bit more comfortable. He's kind of doing a lot more of the things that he was doing in college, and so there's this time that it takes for a lot of running backs to adjust to the speed of the game. I think obviously you have guys like Ezekiel Elliott who are just kind of special players and can adjust immediately, but you can't really expect that from everyone, especially a guy like McKinnon, who's coming from, this is his third year, and he hasn't been really asked to shoulder the load in the past. And coming from a college offense where he was playing quarterback in a more of an option-based offense or a triple option or a wing T type of situation. There's a lot of room for him to get better, which I think is actually a positive thing for the Vikings. And if they're able to stick with the run over the course of the season, they're going to see it get better with time, where I don't necessarily have that optimism with the Eagles.
That makes sense. So one thing that we haven't talked about yet, which I think is a pretty interesting discussion point, because I didn't think we would have pegged this as sort of a strength for the Eagles at the beginning of the season, although you were a big fan of, you were a big fan of Rodney McLeod. The secondary in general seems to be doing pretty well. The Eagles' defense is doing pretty well, so that kind of follows. The Eagles' defense is, third by some measures, second by some other measures. They have, given up more than 9 points a game in the past 2 games now. So, it was maybe a bit of a paper tiger, maybe not. But that secondary is doing pretty well. The Vikings' offense, they've got... don't really have household names. Stephon Diggs is a pretty good receiver. Obviously, he's a number 1 receiver, and he's been doing very well for the Vikings. Adam Thielen, I think, is probably pretty underrated as a receiver, but he doesn't strike fear into the hearts of men. And I was wondering what your thought on the receiver secondary matchup is for the Vikings against the Eagles, because that one seems a lot more ambiguous to me. I think the other way around, with Jordan Matthews and so on, and what Nelson Aguilar against the Vikings secondary, I think that one's a much more positive matchup for the Vikings. But I think that this the other way around is a little bit more ambiguous, because I don't really know what to think of the Eagles secondary.
The Eagles defense is really weird because the safeties are really good. I think the Eagles probably have the top 3 safety duo in the league between Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod. And their defensive line is excellent and has been doing excellent for them this season. But the corners are not good. I think just simply put, you have Jalen Mills, who's a 7th-round rookie, and you have Nolan Carroll and Ron Brooks, who is a special teamer in Buffalo. I mean, those are your 3 cornerbacks. And then the linebackers, Nigel Bradham has been playing tremendously good football. Jordan Hicks has been solid this season, and Michael Kendricks has just been a liability in coverage and against the run. So the team is really depending on the pressure of the defensive front, mitigating the negative impact of poor or mediocre cornerback play. So I think I think Stephon Diggs is probably going to have his way with either of the corners he goes up against, because Jalen Mills, for some ungodly reason, has been matched up with, he matched up with Alshon Jeffrey, and then he matched up with Antonio Brown, and then he matched up with Marvin Jones, and then he matched up with Deshaun Jackson. So really head scratching to put a 7th-round rookie across from those type of players. So all likelihood is they're going to put him against Stephon Diggs, and he's going to get roasted because he's gotten roasted every single game that he's played this season, because he's a 7th-round rookie cornerback and he's starting, and I don't get that. But if the Eagles are able to create pressure like they haven't really been able to the last 2 weeks, then I think that the cornerback play should be mitigated, because I don't think the Vikings skill players are as talented as a whole as the last 2 offenses they faced. But I think it's a little bit more favorable than you think, because there is this weakness in the middle. I guess like the middle 4 or the middle 5 of the Eagles defense is a little bit weaker than the back 2 or the front 4. So it really comes down to, if the Vikings are able to establish a passing game where they're getting the ball out really quickly and they're kind of picking on, Jalen Mills in that short game with Stephon Diggs, I think it's going to be a long day for the Eagles defense, quite honestly.
That makes sense. So when you take a look at the receivers that the Eagles have, Jordan Matthews was a favorite of Draft Twitter. Last year he had a lot of problems with the drops, but this year he's been, I would say, maybe up and down based off of what I've seen. But the rest of the receiving core is either hard to peg or bad. And I know that you're a Zach Ertz truther, but he hasn't really emerged as like, a Greg Olsen, Jordan Reed type threat at tight end. So what is your evaluation of the way that this receiving core is developed, how good this receiving core is, and how it generally matches up, with players like Xavier Rhodes, and evidently Terrence Newman is like the best cornerback in the league or whatever, I don't know, and Harrison Smith?
I'm worried about it, in short, because I think that the Eagles skill players are talented, but the deployment of them is very head scratching. I think Zach Ertz is kind of a meme at this point among Eagles fans, because every single year it's like, all right, this is the year that Zach Ertz breaks out, and then for the first 8 weeks of the season he doesn't do anything, and then the last 8 weeks of the season they actually start throwing him the ball, and it's like, oh wow, this guy's really good. Next year he's going to be just absolutely outstanding, and it's just the same thing over and over and over again. So because we're in the first 8 weeks of the season, Zach Ertz actually not going to do anything. He's not going to catch the ball. He might get like 3 targets and drop the ball twice, and then it's going to be a mess. So he's not going to get the ball. And then with Aguilar, Aguilar has these moments where it's like, where you think he's really good, and then I honestly don't think he's physical enough to consistently play on the outside of outside of an offense. He's not getting separation off the line. He doesn't do a good job beating press, and I think he's really best suited to play in the slot. But they're really content with using Jordan Matthews in the slot, where Jordan Matthews has actually proved to be better down the field. And his targets have gone down every single week, or his target share has gone down every single week, even though he has by far the best efficiency of any of the receivers on the team. So I'm kind of hoping they get him involved again. I'm not sure who he's going to be matched up on, because they like to move the receivers around a little bit. But he's probably going to end up getting matched on a linebacker. Just because of the design of the offense, they like to kind of match things up, similar to how Chip Kelly used him. Dorial Green-Beckham is an enigma, because you never know what you're going to get on any given play with him. Sometimes he's going to look like Megatron, and other times he's going to look like who's that guy who played for the Giants a couple years ago? Ramses Barden, or
oh my God, Ramses Barden.
Yeah,
because he
was really tall and bad. I think 3 times this season he's been matched up against like 5'10" corners in the end zone with jump ball opportunities and loses it. And it's like, dude, you're 6'6". What are you doing? So it's like, that's the type of player he is. So the Eagles' skill players.
He's all upside. He's all upside.
Yeah, it's oh God.
So Ben and I have actually trashed this dude for a while.
A really long time.
and so it is interesting that when you're right, you kind of want to flex a little bit. We were both right about this, even though obviously we have to admit when we're wrong, like about the quarterbacks in this game.
Jesus.
But This is a person that we argued wasn't very athletic coming out, even though that was like his thing. He definitely wasn't very refined coming out. He was also a bad human being, and so seeing him play to his scouting report at odds with what everybody talked about is interesting, just because it feels like you're fighting against the world and then you're finally right, and that's got to be mixed emotions for you. He's on your team.
I don't really care for him as a person, so I don't really care either way about his success. Obviously, I'd like the Eagles to have better receivers.
More likely to lose games as a result of him.
It's frustrating. And the funny thing is, it's like we're going to expand his role in the offense. Every week they say that, and it's like every week he gets 2 targets. So I don't actually really believe, that. And all evidence suggests that, his time in Tennessee, he got traded by Tennessee because the coaching staff was sick of him. They just didn't want to deal with his bullshit. He didn't really feel like learning the offense, apparently. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's similar issues going on in Philadelphia, although I can't say anything for sure. The reality is, on offense for the Eagles, among the receiving corps especially, is their best weapon is Jordan Matthews, and they refuse to really give him a lot of volume in the offense for whatever reason. And it's frustrating because he's a relatively high variance guy, but he's also good at getting deep, but they don't like using him as a deep threat. They like using him as an intermediate threat. So you're kind of limiting the bandwidth, because if he's a high variance guy and he's kind of working in a low upside part of the field, it's then you're not really getting a good player. But if you're using a higher variance guy in a high upside, role in the offense, where it's he might drop a few passes, but he also might get a 20-yard bomb or 30-yard bomb down the field or whatever. Then you kind of take those negative plays with the positive, but it's really, really head scratching, and it's frustrating because I feel like the offense would be a lot better if you used Beckham and Matthews out on the outside, and then you had Aguilar in the slot, and you kind of used him on those short passes where he would use his athleticism to kind of get those yards after the catch. So just some head scratching things, and match up with guys like Xavier Rhodes, who has been so good this season, and Harrison Smith, who I think is the best safety in the NFL. It's really not advantageous for the Eagles, quite simply.
So you've already scripted out what an Eagles win would look like. The Eagles defensive line does Eagles defensive line stuff to take advantage of the Vikings offensive line, who were bad before both tackles went down, and now I guess Brandon Fusco's passed his concussion protocol, so now they've got him back, which is not amazing news, but it's better news than the otherwise. So that script looks like the defensive line shuts down the offensive line, both in the running game, has the ability to get enough pressure on Bradford to maybe force a couple of mistakes, create a couple of sacks. What is the most likely avenue of a Vikings win to you?
I think it really just comes down to the Vikings playing Vikings football. It's going to be their defensive line dominating the Eagles' offensive line, just winning the trench battle on the defensive side of the ball, forcing a rookie into making mistakes, which I think he's going to. This is by far the best defense he's faced, and forcing him out of that system, limiting those short plays, forcing him into taking long throws against a good defensive line. There's going to be mistakes, and on offense for the Vikings, it's really just about being able to keep up the short passing game. You don't want to have deep drop backs against this defensive line with what the Vikings have on the offensive side of the ball. But just kind of picking on the Eagles' corners, that's really their weakness. But if the Vikings try to somehow beat the Eagles by becoming a vertical passing offense against the Eagles, while on defense not being super aggressive in terms of calling blitzes and everything like that, then I think they might lose. I think the only way the Eagles really win is if they can kind of get boom plays out of nowhere on offense while also kind of creating turnovers on defense. And that seems like such an obvious thing to say, but I don't see a way that the Eagles can kind of win this game while working in their comfort zone, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, sure. One thing, so comfort zone is a really important phrase, I think, when it comes to sort of the way that Mike Zimmer designs defenses. So the Eagles have gone up against Chicago defense, a Cleveland defense, a Detroit defense that were not sort of uniquely creative. The Steelers defense is generally pretty creative. It felt like they weren't in this game, but then Of course, Carson also threw sort of more screen passes than I've seen in a while. Although I guess as an Eagles fan, you've probably seen your fair share of screen passes in your lifetime. And the Washington defense is hard to peg for me. I didn't watch a ton of that particular game, but generally speaking, it seems like they've been creative in the past. They're not as creative this year in terms of what they do and what they show to rookies, but they tried to be against Carson Wentz. So I don't really know sort of what that is, but just generally speaking, against sort of innovative defensive looks or creative defenses or defenses designed to get around, what offenses are comfortable with, how has Carson been in just quickly diagnosing a defense after it shows something else post-snap and adapting to that with the nature of the play that's been called?
He's actually done a pretty good job of creating in the limited opportunities he's had to do so. There's been a couple instances where the play's broken down, and he's kind of been able to do a good job moving around the pocket or moving outside of the pocket and finding guys downfield. That's something he's actually impressively good at. But besides that, he does have some issues kind of working in the pocket and working off his first read. That's something I noticed in the first game, and something that's kind of persisted throughout the season where, once he's off he likes to stare down his first read. And then once he works off his first read, he gets a little bit inaccurate. And it's like with him, it almost feels like he's either really good, kind of working in the offense, or he's like really good in complete chaos, which is such a strange dichotomy. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of Johnny Manziel. So it's like he can be this kind of boom or bust player if you get him off his spot. But at the same time, the offense for the most part has been running so efficiently that it's really hard to see that. He's so often been able to hit his first read that it's hard to constantly get a big enough sample size to say anything definitive about his ability.
All right, so get him off his first read. Sounds super easy.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've gone through sort of most elements of the matchup. We didn't talk about scheme as much as we typically do, but I think we kind of peppered in sort of what the offense and the defense looks like. Are there any other thoughts before we get to the mailbag that you have about the way that these teams match up that we haven't covered already?
No, I think we've done a really good job covering everything.
Okay, solid.
We are excellent, I think.
No, I mean we're very good. We're certainly elite
for sure.
Dusty, do you have that mailbag question queued up for Ben?
Do I ever? Alex Goebel, actually, I think, Ben, you've already seen this one, so you've had an opportunity to think about it. Alex Goebel at Uleron on Twitter writes, if Sam Bradford were to star in a classic horror movie remake, what would it be?
Yeah, I thought really long and hard about this yesterday because horror movies are more my wheelhouse than actual football. And I think the thing that makes the most sense to me is Brody in Jaws, because he's just like this like dorky, unassuming person who kills the big shark.
Oh, that's pretty complimentary.
Yeah, I mean, because and this is more disparaging me. Is I didn't think that Sam Bradford would be good this year, and to his credit, he's been a lot more than good. He's been actually quite excellent, I think, and nobody really expected that. Similar to nobody really expecting Brody to be the one in Jaws. I mean, in Jaws, you really are expecting, the tough guy, but he gets eaten by the shark. So, and the fact that Brody's the one who actually kills the shark in the end, I think is pretty surprising based on what you see from the entire movie. So yeah, I mean, you kind of expect Quint to be the guy to kill the shark, but Quint doesn't kill the shark. Sam Bradford does. So, yeah.
I like this answer.
Thank you. It took me a really long time to come up with it.
Well, your effort is not for nothing.
Yeah.
Let's see. Excuse me. Actually, since we got you, maybe you can shed some light on this email question from John Belk as well. Can you walk us through Bradford's injury history and what his various injuries tell us about whether or not he's injury prone versus just unlucky? And if you're looking at health as a skill for bonus points, how does Bradford rate and how does Teddy rate?
Oh my goodness. Well, as an acting student, I have a very long and storied background on medical issues. So, I mean, I think that it's really hard to to find the difference in terms of like saying a guy's unlucky versus a guy's injury prone, because I feel like they're kind of almost the same thing. I mean, I know that there are statistics that have lended themselves about knee injuries, that once you have one knee injury, you're more prone to have another. I think Arif brought that up on the previous podcast we all did together. But in terms of his stuff like shoulder injuries and head injuries and things like that, I can't say a guy is more injury prone than another guy, because I don't really know what that means in relation to just being plain unlucky. And, you know, knock on wood, he's been good this year. I mean, he's been protecting himself well, and he's been playing really well in an offense and behind an offensive line that isn't exactly the best. So I think that maybe his luck has turned, knock on wood, again. And related to Teddy, I mean, Teddy started every game when he was in college. I think he missed like 1 or 2 games due to an injury. He played with injuries before, you know.
Yeah, I think he also missed the start against Rutgers, but then forced his way back into the game with a broken ankle. I don't remember. That was an amazing game.
I think, yeah, and I think that it's hard to call Teddy injury prone, because he was mostly healthy at Louisville. He was mostly healthy during his Vikings career, and talk about an unlucky guy. I mean, he really suffered from a freak accident. And it's funny when you juxtapose that with a guy like Carson Wentz. I mean, Carson Wentz, if you look at his injury history when he was in college, I mean, that's a guy who missed like 6 or 7 games. His final season, I think he missed some previous games with a rib injury the year before. So, I mean, that would be a guy that coming out of college you would say is a lot more injury prone than Teddy Bridgewater, just based on history. But the reality is that he hasn't been in the league, and there's something to be said about a guy who's able to protect himself, which is probably another one of Carson's flaws, is he is way too aggressive with his body. He has Michael Vick syndrome, and that could, or Ben Roethlisberger syndrome, and that can be an issue. But I wouldn't say that anyone is more injury prone than anyone else, especially with Bradford and Teddy. I think they're both kind of just unlucky.
It's a pretty optimistic view of things, I think.
I'm an optimistic guy.
You sound like that on Twitter.
Well, no, but so Teddy's unlucky injury now probably has pretty big influence on his injury proneness later, right? Like his knee is probably going to heal, but it'll also probably never be the same.
That's probably true. I mean, everything that I've read about his knee injury makes it sound like it's not your textbook football knee injury. Like, it was a pretty serious, damage in terms of the nerve damage and ligament damage. So, fair to assume that recovery will be. I mean, he might be a different player, and if he's not, I mean, that's an amazing thing.
Okay, one more question, since you're apparently our resident Sam Bradford expert.
Oh God!
Right? How'd you earn that title?
What a title!
Matt in Wisconsin writes us: people who are experts are drawn to complexity in their area of expertise, sometimes to a fault. Arif would know about that. I imagine the same is true for offensive coordinators. You're experts on offense when they compile their encyclopedic playbooks. The marginal benefit of additional options may be lost because players struggle with the cognitive load. Is the relative success of the Vikings offense in Bradford's first several weeks an argument for simplicity in offensive schemes?
Well, Ben, you take a stab at this, and I'll respond.
I mean, from what I can assume, I think the last time we talked, I suggested something about Pat Shurmur being involved in Sam Bradford's development with the team. And, I mean, it sounds a little ridiculous, and I had this conversation with someone else about why is Sam Bradford playing so well, and I really do want to be I do want to say, and this is kind of my uneducated guess, I really want to say that Shurmur is a lot more involved than maybe we think he is, because if you look at Bradford's career, his best football has come while Pat Shurmur has been on staff, and I think that Shurmur really knows how to work with him, and I think that there was probably some coalition between Shurmur and Norv to kind of draw up an offense that is conducive to Bradford's strengths. But on the flip side, Bradford's also doing stuff I haven't really seen him do before. And at all. Like while he was in Philly, I mean, that game against the Giants, I mean, he and the game against the Giants and the game against Green Bay, he was really slinging it down the field and putting it into tight spots down the field and being aggressive. Like I've rarely seen him be aggressive. You know, he made more aggressive throws in those 2 games that I watch, and more like really impressive throws than basically his 14 games that he played in Philadelphia. So
I believe you called him a coward. That went over well.
Yeah, probably. That sounds like something I would say. So, yeah, there's probably receipts on that, so I probably can't deny that I said that either. Yeah, so I think it's a matter of really being able to conform to your offensive talent, which is such a rare concept in the NFL. And also just Bradford making somewhat of an unprecedented leap forward. And I know that's kind of a cop-out because I was very wrong about him. But, I mean, looking at his history in the league, I mean, what he is doing is very unprecedented based off of his history. So good for him. I mean, I couldn't be happier. You know, nicest guy in the league, right, really.
Those are usually pretty backhanded compliments, but in this case, I think you front-loaded it well enough that we can avoid any implication of a backhanded compliment. What's your thought on this player? Nice guy.
Trying to be diplomatic. Yeah, he's a nice guy. Nice guy. Good player. Nice guy. Not a coward.
Evidently not. One thing that I think is interesting about the way that we talk about like simple offenses and simple defenses and stuff like that is that very often I think that we're attracted to solutions that sound simple. They don't have to be simple solutions themselves, but they sound simple. And creating a simple offense is kind of one of those solutions. And definitely for a while, it very will often work. I mean, we saw this happen for Trestman with the simple offense for McCown. We saw this for Kelly, actually, with simple offense for Foles. We saw a bunch of iterations of relatively simple offenses do pretty well in the league. But for the most part, most of the simple offenses have broken down over the course of multiple years. And I think the reason for that is that with some level of complexity, it doesn't have to be as complex as, you know, the Patriots playbook is. I mean, the Peyton Manning offense was an extraordinarily simple offense. I'm not saying they're necessarily always going to be bad in the long run, but the point is that you need to throw in some complexity in order to create adaptability to what people are doing. And, you know, that's kind of the biggest problem that Chip Kelly has had is that he hasn't added any complexity to his offense. And so when people respond to it, he didn't give himself sort of the room to respond to those responses. And because like sort of offenses and defenses are involved in this constantly ongoing conversation, the conversation basically gets stale if one side of it kind of does the same thing over and over again. And if you view that conversation sort of as like a win-loss, then, you know, the stale side of the conversation is losing. So I think that, you know, simple offenses are very good, especially in the short term, in bringing players along, but you need to continuously add complexity to that offense in order for it to be responsive to what's happening around it, and B, unpredictable enough that it can still create new things because you're still meshing sort of the unpredictability of the offense with it. That said, execution is very important. There was a very simple offense that Peyton Manning ran his entire career that was built more on execution than it was built on evolving plays, but it is unfair to say that because Peyton Manning could do something with an offense, or on the other side of it, that Tom Brady can do something with an offense, that those are ideal versions of an offense. So I think that simplicity can be good, and I think that teams shy away from it too quickly. But I do think that our understanding of the way that defenses evolve in the NFL and the way that, schemes in general evolve in the NFL, that you don't want to overrate simplicity either. And I think that, the simplicity that the Vikings have in the offense right now, which incidentally it's a pretty simple offense, is good and is a big part of the reason for the passing success, but it needs to continuously evolve, which I think it will be over the course of the season in order to have success in the postseason. And if Bradford's the starting quarterback next year, which seems pretty likely at this point, then you're going to need to add increasing complexity, which I don't think is a problem, because I don't think Bradford has shown an inability to absorb new offenses or anything like that. It's basically been his entire career. So I think that the relative success of the Vikings offense can be attributed in part to the simplicity that they have, but they will need to be complex going forward. Not the most complex, not like the Patriots, right? But it will need to add complexity, kind of like the Seahawks offense has done with Russell Wilson over the course of its last 4 seasons.
A solid answer, I should say. Well,
right.
I suppose we can probably let Ben go here. I know you've got education to attend to. You've been
thank you.
Broadcasting from the school cafeteria studios, as best we can tell. But thank you again very much for your insight. It is always a pleasure having you on the show. One of my favorite things about you is that you are able to cram like everything useful into a relatively short interview. Like you are a man who wastes few words. And as the opposite, I'm a little jealous of your technique.
I hope my economy of words will serve me well when I go to law school.
Go to law school, huh? Well, I'm going to leave that alone because that's beyond the scope of this particular episode of Norse Code. Your work can be found at Bleeding Green Nation. There is a new and extremely not controversial article that you have written there. I guess I'll give you one final chance to plug any work that you have coming down the pike, or warn us about anything that you have planned before we set you free.
Yeah, I mean, I just came up with this piece about kind of talking about Josh Brown and this culture of domestic violence in the NFL and rape culture in the United States, and I do bring in the presidential race a little bit, and it is more of a bigger picture article. It isn't that focused on football. I'm very thankful that Bleeding Green Nation actually allowed me to put it on their website, and for future, I'm doing every week. I do an NFL draft game of the on the lighter side of things. I do an NFL draft game of the week, and I will actually be doing a thing where I look at some of the best deep threats in college football. Because that's something that the Eagles really need. So if that's something you're interested in, pop on down to the Ben Natan on Twitter.
The Ben Natan. If my prediction comes true and it really is a Vikings-Eagles NFC Championship game, then we'll be sure to have you back. Otherwise,
yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, we'll see. I feel better about our chances than yours at this point. But
yeah.
But if nothing else, we'll certainly have you back during draft time.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it.
At the Ben Natan on Twitter, or just Ben Natan if you see him on the street. Thanks so much for being on the show again, Ben.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, that was delightful.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't get a score prediction out of him. That's okay. I don't think we do.
Yeah, we haven't really been doing those as much this year, and it's I don't know. 43-0. That's my score prediction. No.
I know that's Ben's score prediction. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. Indeed. Couple questions left. Justin Ekstrom at the SportsCrib21 on Twitter writes in, what is the best offensive line combo right now for the Vikings? Probably the only one, right? Do we have any depth to speak of?
I mean, you could play TJ Clemmings, I guess, instead of Jake Long. Or fiddle with the guards a little bit. I mean, I did mention sort of that crazy idea for moving Boone to left tackle, but since they signed Jake Long, I wouldn't do it. I think you're right. It's like the standard one, the one you expect. So Jake Long, Alex Boone, Joe Berger, Brandon Fusco, and Jeremiah Searles. I think that's really the only way to construct this offensive line. I think that there's not a bunch of other ways to construct it so that you have an answer at right tackle outside of Searles. So you want to have Searles, and I think that Kieran played poorly enough at guard that you want Brandon Fusco there. Because I think that, Brandon Fusco got a bad rap. I think that the first 2 games he didn't play very well, but since then he's played actually quite well for the Vikings. Not like, 2013 Brandon Fusco or anything like that, but like pretty well. And then Kieran came in and played for him, and he played very, very poorly. So I think with all that in mind, I think that that's really the only way that you can construct it. I mean, I don't want to move Boone around unless it is to tackle, and there's no reason to move him to tackle at this point, which means there's no reason to move Berger out of the center spot, which means the only question you really have is at guard, and we already had that question basically answered. So there is one functional setup for this offensive line, but I think before Jake Long arrived, that there were potentially other ways to sort of mess around.
But now, I mean, he's... so he fits into one position so well that there's no point in shuffling the deck chairs on this particular Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. This particular Titanic.
There's just so many. Zen Cupid at ZenDBP on Twitter writes us, who would you take if both reached their ceilings? Treadwell or Patterson?
So this is really more a discussion of what the word ceiling means than it is like a discussion of the two players.
Yeah.
So like Patterson obviously is, much more athletic than Treadwell, and this has nothing to do with like, Treadwell's poor combine scores or anything like that, and everything to do with the fact that Patterson's like kind of an athletic freak. Because like you take a look at his skill set and you see what Odell Beckham has put together. Like that's like physically, athletically, you can kind of see the same things. You can also see, the same things for Sammy Watkins, right? In fact, that was the comp that Sammy Watkins had coming out, is that he's a refined Cordero Patterson. There is some element of, what A.J. Green does physically to what Patterson does. So if you take a look at Patterson's, athletic ceiling, he's basically unlimited. I don't see the same thing for Laquan Treadwell athletically, but that's not everything that a ceiling is. A ceiling includes, your ability to incorporate wide receiver skill, your ability to be technical and stuff like that, your ability to like play through contact. So, for example, part of Treadwell's ceiling is the fact that he's more likely to win contested catches because of his playing style and who he is as a player than Cordero Patterson. And you don't want to like say, well, Patterson can work through that, because then everyone's ceiling is kind of limitless. So our understanding of Patterson's ceiling is limited by the fact that he's not going to be a jump ball receiver. But is it limited by the fact that, it takes them a long time to learn new stuff? Like, I don't know. Like, when we're talking about someone hitting their ceiling, we've kind of basically just asserted, well, at this point, they've learned everything they're going to learn. This is what they look like. And I think that Treadwell doesn't have enough advantages. I think that he's just more likely to hit his ceiling. That's what makes him such a interesting and, like, I don't want to say hyped, but, like, sort of a well-respected prospect coming out. Is that he was just more likely to hit his ceiling, and that his ceiling wasn't necessarily low, right? Because he like runs people over and stuff like that. So I guess I'd take Patterson at his ceiling over Treadwell at his ceiling, but I just don't know what that looks like. I guess because he's implying that Patterson has hit his ceiling or can hit a ceiling, I think implies that he's taking advantage of his athletic talents to their full ability, and that's the best receiver in the league because he's one of the most athletic receivers in the league. Treadwell, his ceiling is not bad. Like what? It's like Brandon Marshall, right, or Alshon Jeffrey. Like it's not bad at all. Like no one would be upset about that. So yeah, I don't know. Like I guess I'd take Patterson to hit his ceiling, but it's not as if Treadwell has a low ceiling, and it's definitely not as if Patterson is like more likely to hit his ceiling. So I guess that's my long answer.
Well, and I guess my question would be, how would you ever know a player's ceiling until he, like, hit it and started to fall off? And then how long do you have to wait before they've fallen off? I mean, I think there are some that would say that Patterson had, hit his ceiling last season because of issues with him, like being able to run routes and, learning slowly and not doing things tightly and cleanly. And, even though he's got all this athleticism, it's still kind of relegated him to mostly a gadget role, whereas now we've seen him as a much bigger part of the offense this year because they've, I guess, found ways to incorporate the skills he has or found ways to teach him new skills in a better way so that he can contribute more. And now you might say that his ceiling has changed a little bit, if he's even hit it yet.
Well, I guess the question about a ceiling is like what happens when a player is put in their optimal coaching environment and their optimal schematic environment, and then also that player hits the top end of their cognitive ability. So a player's ceiling might not be the peak of their career. They may have never reached their ceiling, which then becomes like ephemeral and impossible to define and impossible to falsify and test against and stuff like that. It becomes very frustrating to talk about. So in some sense, like you may never know what a player's ceiling is, right? Like the only player to have probably ever hit his ceiling is Jerry Rice. He's technically the most refined receiver that we've ever seen, maybe. And so he was able to make the most of everything that he was. People argue that Randy Moss, who is, according to some people, the best receiver of all time, according to other people, the second best, according to people who are like really big fans of T.O., the third best. But a lot of people argue that Randy Moss never hit his ceiling, which, I mean, one of the greatest receivers of all time. If you took one receiver for a season, you might take Randy Moss over Jerry Rice. one receiver for a game, you take Randy Moss over Jerry Rice. So you take that guy more than like literally any other guy on the planet for one game, potentially. And you're like, yeah, but he hasn't hit a ceiling, right? And so the ceiling is kind of like a weird term because it's not something that you can prove. Like if you have an opinion about what a player's ceiling is, you can almost never prove what that ceiling is. Everyone's ceiling is basically Jerry Rice, right? Because everyone can get better at like some things and other things and, you know, all that. But I think that we basically adjust our understanding of ceilings based off of a player's athletic potential and not off their ability to access that potential cognitively with like the kind of player that they are, or incorporate it technically with the kind of player that they are. So Patterson may end his career, even if he ends it well, with an argument that he'll never have hit his ceiling, at which point you're kind of left out of that realm of the discussion that you're having, is that we don't even know that. Like after a player's career is over, we don't even know, you know, what the ceiling was, because the most optimal environment possible for that player would have produced a better player, but how much better?
Well, that makes it much clearer. For sure.
I mean, that's why I don't really talk about ceilings that often when I talk about rookies.
All right. Ooh, one late arriving question from Wade Stover at W Stover on Twitter. Is Tom Johnson the Kurt Warner of defensive tackles?
I mean, Kurt Warner's headed to the Hall of Fame, so no, but I mean, it's not as if they have completely dissimilar paths. I mean, Tom Johnson, undrafted free agent, stuck around for maybe like a couple years, then had to head to NFL Europe, where I think Kurt Warner played in NFL Europe, and then after NFL Europe folded because it was a long time ago and no one wanted it, he had to play in the Arena League for a while, which Kurt Warner did. They maybe even played for the same team at one point, like the Omaha Nighthawks maybe. And then, kind of brought up as an unremarkable backup, in this case with New Orleans, and now is playing as one of the better defensive tackles in the league. But I mean, no, because Tom Johnson is not a Hall of Fame quality defensive tackle, and he's also a very situational tackle. None of this is to take away, from Tom Johnson, who again, as this podcast was recording, this piece had been published. As an ode to Tom Johnson, one of the most underrated players on the Vikings defense. But Kurt Warner wasn't underrated at the end of like his breakout season in 1999. He was very appropriately rated as one of the best in the NFL. Tom Johnson is not one of the best in the NFL, but he is underrated, and I think those are kind of key distinctions. And not only that, Tom Johnson is really only brought in passing situations. In fact, 80% of his snaps are pass rushing snaps, which is more than any other defensive tackle in the league that has taken like a significant number of snaps, and also more than any other defensive tackle in the league. Once you adjust for the fact that some teams see more pass attempts than others, the Vikings see the second most pass attempts as a percentage of plays, more than any other team, besides like San Diego. But even after you adjust for that, Tom Johnson has more passing snaps than he has rushing snaps, but more than any other defensive tackle in the league. So he's clearly a very situational player that is thriving in the situation the Vikings have put him in. And maybe this is a player who's hit his ceiling. How about that? I think that Johnson is a fantastic story. Didn't expect him to make the roster, in 2014. He made waves in 2015 when he had to replace injured Tree Floyd. And of course, he's doing the same thing this time, very capably. But again, he's a situational guy who is performing his specific narrow role maybe better than any other defensive tackle in the league. But because it's so narrow, you can't say he's like a top 10 tackle, because top 10 tackles do a bunch of stuff on a bunch of downs, and he doesn't. Love him though.
So not in Hall of Fame. Similar backstory, but may never be king.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to do it. Again, Ben gets us out the door in record time. Although I would say that was a fairly comprehensive preview of the upcoming matchup this weekend. Is there anything that you would like to add now that Ben is not here to tell you that you're wrong or to share in your wrongness with you?
No, I mean, I don't think there's much to add. I mean, Ben obviously knows more about the Eagles than I do, and I'm kind of interested in sort of how this matchup will break down. I do think that Eagles defensive line is going to be a huge problem. I think that, Jim Schwartz is kind of underrated as a defensive coordinator, which is weird because everyone's always said he's a better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach, which is at some level praise for his ability to DC. But yeah, I think the Eagles defense is not getting the attention it really deserves because it's a top 5 defense in the league right now, and it's being paired with a very, very good offense. Some people are saying a top 5 offense. Obviously, that's kind of fallen off, and that's it's pretty frustrating. So I think that is a more interesting matchup to me than the other side of the ball. I do hope, of course, that Carson Wentz crashes and burns for my own reasons, not because I want to be right, but because I'm a hater. Like, it's different. Like, I want him to fail because he went to NDSU, not because it would mean that I was right in the long run. That's more pure, I think.
And that's where I'm at, too. I have this, deep-seated ambivalence about NDSU, growing up as their, northern rival in many ways. And so to see a Bison alum fail is always satisfying. But...
Exactly.
I'm starting to get to the point where I've been gone for long enough to where it's like anytime I can point to a North Dakota native, doing something other than getting arrested for like protesting a pipeline, you almost want to take credit for them. Like I'm okay omitting the part about how I've always hated NDSU when I tell people that Carson Wentz is actually from North Dakota and went to college there.
I think it's a more interesting story to be like, no, I personally hate the guy. Like, why? What did he possibly do to you? Oh, he went to my college rival. Like, whoa.
Because the Bison are the worst.
They had a rival. Weird.
I know. Who was also from North Dakota.
You've never heard of them.
2 colleges.
The University of North Dakota.
Which is not the same as North Dakota State University, believe it or not.
Still confused. It was a really quick episode. I think we got everything covered.
Excellent. Well, then you can find us at NorseCodePodcast.com or the Daily Norseman or on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/Daily Norseman. We're on Twitter at NorseCodeDN. Our producer James runs the Twitter feed. He is at Big Mono. I am at Dusty O'Connell. Our guest is at the Ben Natan. And, of course, Arif is at Arif Hassan NFL. If you would like to contribute to Norse Code, you may do so at paypal.me/Norse Code for a one-time contribution or patreon.com/Norse Code to become a contributing member, an ongoing sponsor, and our friend. Like, you'll actually be, like, we're not joking, our friendship is for sale. So if you would like to be our friend, please visit those links and contribute to the show. If you want to submit questions by email, norsecodepodcast@gmail.com is the place to do it. We will be back early next week as James and Arif recap what is likely to be a victory over the Philadelphia Eagles. And until then, spoons out. Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.